Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Good. I'm recovering, but I've not recovered completely yet.
Yeah, tell me about it.
But, I went to bed pretty early. I didn't think too much was to be expected to come of this. I think there's going to be a lot of people wondering what the results are of this election for a long time to come. Even when it's decided, it's not decided because there'll be some shenanigans going on somewhere. So it's a shame that there used to be a time, even when they were fighting and fuming, that was a rather calm evening. And I can remember, I guess the first election I remember, presidential election, it's pretty amazing. I think I was 5 because it was Wendell Willkie in 1940. I think I was 5 years old. But my dad would listen to the returns by radio, of course, and it was a big deal. And but now we have all this activity, and we get to follow it minute by minute, and sometimes they prepare for their shenanigans and their lawsuits a long time before the election is over.
Yeah.
But it might fit into my theme about the bankruptcy of this country. The physical, financial bankruptcy as well as the moral bankruptcy. When you think about it, one of the reasons why before the election, when I would be pressed on who I thought would win, I came up with Trump. Not that I had a real, insight and that I had secret information. It was just that I thought with all that stuff breaking, the potential, corruption of the Bidens, there's no way that the people are going to be voting, for an individual like that. But it looks like a lot of votes were cast. But right now, so far, what we've seen, or I've seen and looked at, there's a lot of questions raised. Where are the votes? Traditionally, it was pretty good, but at the end of the night, most of the time you knew who won and who lost in all the races, but that is not the case now. It's not 100 here and 100 there. It used to be that the absentee votes, and that's not been so long ago. 10 minutes after the polls closed, you had the absentee votes.
Yeah.
And you had those results. And then, of course, there were the delays with the military vote, but they were always small in number. But that's not what we're talking about now. They're not talking about 100 or 200 votes or 1,000 or 2. They're talking about all of a sudden 100,000 picked up. And there was one report that they found it, and every single vote went to one candidate. And then you'd think that would raise a question on just what's going on. Where have those ballots been, and what's going on? So I think there's going to be a lot of sorting out to do. I don't think this is going to be settled. There's even the possibility it won't be settled by the 22nd of January, but I think it will be, because I think the Supreme Court, let's say that it was deadlock on all these cases and so confusing and so ridiculous, some of these rulings, that they might just have a ruling and go ahead and say, look, settle it into Congress, settle it in the House of Representatives, settle it in the Senate the way the Constitution tell them to do it. And that is what I would think is likely, to happen. But it remains to be seen. Right now, if you're looking at the markets say it looks like Trump's going to be in there, and the markets won't be shaken up too much. But then when you look at the people who do the betting, which is devised a little bit differently, they're putting cash out. They're saying that Biden is going to win. So even the bettors and the markets haven't figured out what's going to happen. So there's a lot of confusion out there, because there's a lot of confusion in this election. And I wish it weren't so serious. It could be just fun figuring this stuff out, but has a lot of ramification. The only thing, I was searching for something that would be positive, and it may be that the old-fashioned complication that many libertarians have talked about, gridlock isn't all that bad. Some people said when you have the government shut down, this is horrible, horrible, horrible. But sometimes when to get shut down, maybe they'll do less. But then it got to the point where government's on autopilot, so you shut down the government and they still do things. So we've lost our way when it comes to spending and the role of government and what elections are all about. So I guess it's going to be many weeks now before this is resolved.
It was an amazing night. You know, I was up watching the returns, and it seemed to progress normally for quite a while. They were calling votes and this sort of thing. And then all of a sudden, I was watching Fox News. All of a sudden, they called Arizona for Biden, and a very, very small amount of votes had been counted. And even the other people on Fox asked the guy, "Are you sure about this? Do you want to reverse this?" They kept saying this over and over. No. They called it for Biden extremely early on, and that had a huge effect. And then after that, they simply stopped calling states for anyone. They basically stopped. It was past midnight. I finally went to bed, but and they literally did in the battleground states. They simply stopped counting. And someone mentioned this is maybe the first time ever. They just said we're not going to count any more votes. And you know, Molly Hemingway, who writes for the Federalist, made a good point. She said they were calling close states for Biden immediately. And the states that were overwhelmingly going to Trump, they waited and waited and waited to call those states. So it brings into question certainly the media's role in this. The other thing, there are a couple of things, and I'll point to some discrepancies. Again, we don't know. These are things that we've seen that cause us to raise questions in our minds about what's going on here. First off, and this is Alex Berenson, former New York Times reporter, he just tweeted out, according to the Wisconsin Election Commission, there were 3,684,726 registered voters as of November 1st. 450,000 more than that number voted. So that is a little bit suspicious. And let's look at a couple of these clips that we're looking at. Again, we are not making any claims. We're simply looking at some anomalies. Here's Michigan on the left. It got an update. They updated, meaning a big bunch of votes came in, and so they updated. Every single one of those votes updated, 138,339, every single one went to Joe Biden after this update of the votes. That seems strange. We don't know the answer. It seems very strange. President Trump has retweeted this map himself with the question mark about how is this possible. Let's look at the next one because this happened elsewhere. This is that jump in Michigan when all of a sudden 130,000 votes, all of them went to Biden. Let's look at the next one. And here's next door in Wisconsin. You see that same jump. Here is Trump in the lead by a comfortable margin. You can see that red line, comfortable margin. And all of a sudden, over 100,000 votes are dropped, all for Biden. It definitely raises questions. Let's look at the next one really quickly. I think we have one more. The same thing happened in Georgia. All of a sudden, a huge bump. Now, President Trump right now is maintaining a slight lead there. But the question is, where's the next big box of votes going to come from? Boy. Suspicious. We don't know.
And to expect an answer for this in a short period of time, this is going to be a can of worms for sure. You know, and the other thing that's going on, it's going to end up in court. It's going to end up, as far as I'm concerned, with the Supreme Court, and they don't know. They just don't have a few state laws that have been changed that permitted some of this. There were many, many cases that reestablished the rules, and they won them in courts lower than the Supreme Court. And when it gets to court, I don't know how they're going to have a true ruling without dealing with every one of those laws that changed the way you counted the vote. And of course, to have a jurisdiction, I guess states can mess up their own election, but they can't mess up the presidential election. So there would be jurisdiction, and I just think that that's going to come, but who knows when? Maybe today we'll see something else break. But if it continues this way, that all of a sudden they find a couple 100,000 votes and they go to one person.
Kim Jong-un.
I've told this story before, but it was a mini story like this when we lost an election election by 100 votes, and we found 1,300, and we were having a contest going on, and we found these books, these sign-in books, always with the same signature. Where did these votes come from? Oh, here they are. They're right here. They all voted in precinct 10, and they all had the same signature. So, but these people, but it's not like this whole idea that you don't even have to have a postmark on it, and prove anything. You don't have to have identification, and I bet you when it's all settled, you'll find that there'll be some places there are going to be more votes than people.
Yeah, well, we already
maybe that's it, huh?
Yeah, in Wisconsin, more votes than certainly registered voters. At least that's according to their website. So who knows? Well, let's have a couple more charts to look at because we're raising questions about it. Let's look at this next one. This is also Alex Berenson. Astonishing chart here. It suggests Philadelphia mail-in ballots are running 19-1 in favor of Joe Biden. His net margin looks to be about 90%. Question mark. There's a big question mark about that. Hillary Clinton won that area that he's talking about with 82% of the vote, so definitely is a Democrat stronghold. However, he's above 90%. This really is Kim Jong-un levels of voting. Let's look at the next one. And why is that? What is happening in Pennsylvania? The president has to win Pennsylvania at this point for any chance. This is the attorney general of the state, the person in charge of the elections. Here's what he said a couple of days before the election. If all the votes are added up in Pennsylvania, Trump is going to lose. How would he know that before the election even took place? That's a big question.
He might have been the protector of those ballots that they
finally you want him in charge of things.
Yeah.
He's already predicted that Trump will lose.
I am interested in what kind of changes occurs after an election. You have a new administration, you have a new Congress. But it's harder to talk about that right now because we don't have an election yet. Yeah. It's in limbo. But if we have a pseudo-election, we had the election, we just don't have the results yet. But one thing that became, and I thought it was a pretty significant event, and one of the reasons why I thought Trump would have a lot more votes and there'd be none of these questions, had to do with the lockdown, and the kind of things that violated civil liberties and on and on. But the lockdown probably hasn't, there's probably no significant change, but if we'd have had a clean election, there might have been a referendum on this. So it looks like it's going to be pushed aside right now. Nobody cares. I'll bet if they needed some people going in there switching ballots, nobody would have to wear a mask to get the dirty work done. So I think it's a forgotten thing because I think in many ways it was a concocted issue before the election, and it should have been an important issue because that's where the civil liberties were being threatened. It was literally being threatened by people not being allowed to leave their house and on lockdown, and so many businesses went broke over it. So there's a big issue there, and you should have a referendum on that so that we change something. That policy is so horrible, and yet it looks like now, depending on what the governors want to do, they're going to continue with this. Maybe indirectly it'll be a distraction from the governors writing more executive orders dealing with coronavirus. Who knows? But I think lawlessness is sort of pervasive in our system today.
Yeah, and I monitor Twitter as we're talking. Not that I'm paying close attention, but I just want to be sure to clarify that we've seen a clarification of this Wisconsin issue that I just mentioned, and it looks like, indeed, not more people voted than were registered. They just had an extraordinarily high turnout. Again, it's possible we're raising issues, we're not making conclusions. So it's incorrect that more people voted than were registered, but a very, very high number voted that were registered. Now, you mentioned earlier the changes in the electoral process in the U.S., and this is something I have to admit basically went under my radar screen. I've always been interested in elections. I was an election monitor for a number of years over in Central and Eastern Europe. I know a bit about monitoring elections. I know a bit about when red flags come up in the processes. There are so many red flags here. It looks like a May Day rally in the USSR. But here's a really important thing that went under my radar screen until I started digging into it today. And let's look at this next clip. This is from Breitbart. I made a joke. I was on RT earlier today, and I made a joke that the same people who invented Russiagate are the people who were counting coronavirus are the people who are now counting the ballots. I was joking, but it actually looks like it's true. This is lawyer Mark Elias. He was Hillary Clinton's campaign lawyer. He has spent the years since Hillary lost going from state to state, the battleground states, filing lawsuits to change voting procedures and to bring in this so-called ballot harvesting. What ballot harvesting is, and it's happening everywhere, it used to be that it had to be a family member who brought your ballot in, and you had to prove it was. With ballot harvesting, party operatives can collect and submit as many ballots as they wish. They can go around, and we've seen examples of this sort of coercion in old folks' homes. They just come in with the box, and there is no process for verifying the ballots or verifying the identity of the person who cast those ballots. That's what he's been doing. But guess what, Dr. Paul? This same Mark Elias, he is the individual who hired Fusion GPS to produce the phony Russian dossier for the Clinton campaign. He's the guy who wrote the check to create the phony Russia dossier. He's the one who's been changing the election rules, suing to get the election rules changed, and he's the one, I would say, that's behind what at least appears to us as a serious question about the integrity of voting. And I really say that as an election monitor. If this were happening overseas, I would throw up my arms and say, no, this is a fail, not a pass.
Yeah. You know, the whole issue, I think, that we're talking about is corruption. And governments tend to always move toward corruption. The bigger the government is, the more corruption there is. And most people understand that if the stories are true about what went on with Biden, you know, taking the money and being involved, that's pretty clear-cut corruption. And people, you know, really, if they'll say if that's true, that's wrong, and they shouldn't do it. But of course, if it sort of helps them at the polls, they don't care too much. But there's also the whole system is corrupt. That's what bothers me, because you know, there's Bastiat coined the word the plunder. You know, the government plunders one group to take care of the other group, and his solution to this is governments can't do anything that you and I can't do. But the whole principle of redistribution of wealth is plunder, and so if people get rich by selling and building weapons we don't need, has nothing to do with national defense, then the people who have to pay, which is usually the middle class, they're being plundered. But that they don't count that as corruption. That's political stuff, political shenanigans, and it's just a matter of who gets to pass out the money. And that's what the whole budget is all about, and that's why budgets get passed by Republicans and Democrats, because they accept, in that sense, the plunder. Of course, maybe they accept what we're talking about more than I wish they would, because it's who's winning that counts. You know, to milk these ballots and all. Well, if this is good for my candidate, maybe we can go ahead and do this. But and you know, when you think about all this, can there be another rule passed for this? No, it's not going to happen. This is really a basic analysis of the morality of the people. And if the people are immoral, you're going to have these things, in spite of the ways that the founders tried to protect against this. You know, it almost becomes irrelevant. And I think that might be the bottom line of this election, how irrelevant the elections have come. I've argued against them for a long time, because philosophically there's no difference when it comes to spending, printing money, Federal Reserve, and foreign policy and welfare state. It's all the same. But now it has gotten deeper and deeper, involved so many people, that I just think that the election now is less relevant than it's ever been before. And depending on what we do now, because there's not going to be one ruling that's going to correct this. You know, it may be a correct ruling and it might help, but the whole thing is, if it involves the morality of a people and the way our society works, it's not going to do much good.
Well, you know what else is irrelevant when you look back? I mean, we're sort of excited about the presidential race because there seems to be some funny stuff going on, and it's really close, and we don't know who won. First time in my lifetime that's ever happened. But there are other things, if we step back a little bit. What else has become irrelevant is the media and the polling system. I mean, I thought that it was bad with Hillary Clinton in terms of there's an 85,000% chance she'll win. You know, I thought it was bad then. The polls, not just on the presidency, but on the entire so-called blue wave, were so massively, massively wrong. that you have to either conclude that the polling companies are run by absolute idiots, maybe chimpanzees are running it, or they had some malintent, some malice, using the polls as tools of propaganda rather than as tools to inform the American people of the way that the feeling is going in the country. The polls were a disaster.
And, I think there's going to be a continuation of this problem. I think the Democrats are going to have a bigger problem, not less of a problem. First off, their so-called blue wave didn't materialize. They lost 5 seats in the House. They gained 1 seat in the Senate. But they don't have the control that they have, and there are dissensions within the party. Now, I kept thinking that it would be good, to see the Marxist-oriented congresswomen lose. But they won overwhelmingly. There are no problems, and that's the squad. They win.
Yeah.
And they're going to have more power and more clout. And I think it's going to create a real split within the Democratic Party. And there may be, because things are closer, there may be more coalitions between some Republicans and the Democrats who don't think they have to become a member, of the squad and endorse every single thing the Marxist-oriented members are advocating. So that I think is a possibility that it'll work out that way, and maybe that'll just contribute more to the gridlock, when Democrats fight among themselves.
Here's something that interesting came in on Twitter while we were talking. Matt Schlapp, who's the chairman of the American Conservative Union, so a guy who's involved in politics. There's a lot of stuff going on in Arizona right now. Of course, Fox called it very early, which was incredibly irresponsible, I think. And now it looks like Trump is trying to claw his way back. Molly Hemingway has reported that Trump campaign people are saying, we think we can actually pull this off. But what's amazing that's happening, and again, not verified, but this is what he tweeted, Arizona update. Apparently the use of Sharpie pens in GOP precincts is causing ballots to be invalidated. Could be huge numbers of mostly Trump supporters. And I actually read about this earlier, that they were giving out Sharpie pens to mark your ballots in a lot of these Arizona precincts, and people were marking it, and it would spit out as invalid and invalid vote. And a lot of people are talking about this. So there is a lot of this stuff apparently going on right now.
Yeah, and to me it seems strange. The one ruling that the courts have ruled on is that there's no limit. It used to be, at 8 o'clock, if you're in line, you get to vote. But now they're talking about letting people change their votes and let people vote for 7 more days. I mean, it is so crazy, and it just holds this whole idea of finding votes. Now this thing about the pens, that's an outrage too, if that's a true story. But that people will not become more willing to accept what's going on. And a lot of people, the percentage of the number of people who don't believe what government tells them anyway. And even our program is based on trying to tell people the truth, whether it has the coronavirus and military-industrial complex, fighting wars that are unnecessary, and all the investigations done by government. They set them up to find out these commissions. Most people don't even believe the results. The majority of people don't believe it, and yet at the same time, there's still a majority that reflects this desire and the temptation to get something for free.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and even some people who know it won't work. Well, I might as well take my share now before it's all gone.
It sounds like the Jackson City Council. Well, I'm gonna close out if we're done, and I'm going to close out with something that I think is fascinating, and it really underscores our view that the media has completely failed. The mainstream media has completely broken down. They're only interested in narratives and propaganda. They're not interested in the truth. This is going to surprise you, because it actually did surprise me. Now, President Trump, we've been told for the last 3 3/4 years, is the most racist president in the history of the world. He's secretly putting on capes and robes and, doing all these. He's the worst, most hateful, anti-people of color president in the world, in the history of the world. Let's look at this next. This is fascinating that I've seen. Trump wins highest share of non-white vote for the GOP since 1960. Looks like he pulled 26% of the non-white vote. what are all these non-white people thinking? How dare they vote for such an evil, racist scoundrel?
Will they have to do this in secret and deny I'm in denial? No, I didn't do it. somebody did that. I wouldn't do that. So no, that's a shame. You know, this whole idea about voting in groups, I know everybody thinks about it, and there's good reason to it, because groups have been discriminated because they're a member of a group, and you have to admit that is the case. But I think it's wrong dealing with people in groups. We should deal with people as individuals. You should never discriminate against a group because a person belongs to a group, but you should never get a special benefit because you belong to a group either. You're entitled to your right to your life and your liberty because you're an individual with natural rights. But once you say, I'm in a group and I deserve this, or I deserve reimbursement, and on, there's no way you can restore liberty if you accept this whole notion that rights are a collective issue and it comes in bundles, it comes in groups, and that just leads to the fighting, especially as the country becomes more immoral and more bankrupt, and then the arguments and the fighting gets much worse. So as far as I'm concerned, so many of these things can be solved by just understanding the issue of individual natural rights, and deal with that. And everything is done voluntarily. You can't lie, cheat, steal, hurt people. And this would solve a lot of our problems because it recognizes the importance of individuals owning their own life. At the same time, the evidence is overwhelming that the middle class gets bigger and richer under these conditions. The whole society becomes richer. And the other neat part about it, you don't have those that are able to achieve special favors from the government and become part of the elite corporate rich, the corporations that are able to use the government, like if you're in the military industrial complex, or you get other benefits. That wouldn't exist if you would go back to the very simplicity of understanding an individual right coming in a natural way and people assuming the responsibility for taking care of themselves. It'd be a neat world as far as I'm concerned. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.